Chapter 8. A few days later, when the terror caused by the executions had died down, some of the animals remembered, or thought they remembered, that the sixth commandment decreed, "No animal shall kill another animal." And though there was no one cared to mention in the hearing of the pigs or the dogs, it was felt that the killing which had taken place did not square with this. Clover asked Benjamin to read her the sixth commandment, and when Benjamin, as usual, said he refused to meddle in such matters, she fetched Muriel. Muriel read the commandment for her. It ran, "No animal shall kill any other animal without cause." Somehow or other, the last two words had slipped out of the animal's memory, but they saw now that the commandment had not been violated, for clearly there was good reason for killing the traitors who had leagued themselves with Snowball. Throughout the year the animals worked even harder than they had worked in the previous year, to rebuild the windmill with walls twice as thick as before, and to finish it by the appointed date, together with the regular work of the farm, was a tremendous labor. There were times when it seemed to the animals that they worked longer hours and were fed no better than they had done in Jones's day. On Sunday morning, Squealer, holding down a long strip of paper with his trotter, would read out to them the list of figures proving that the production of every class of foodstuffs had increased by 200%, 300%, or 500%, as the case might be. The animals saw no reason to disbelieve him, especially since they could no longer remember very clearly what conditions had been like before the rebellion. At the same, there was days when they felt that they would sooner have less figures and more food. All orders were now issued through Squealer or one of the other pigs. Napoleon himself was not seen in public as often as once in a fortnight. When he did appear, he was attended not only by the routine of dogs, but a black cockerel, who marched in front of him and acted as a kind of trumpeter, letting out a loud cock-a-doodle-doo before Napoleon spoke. Even the farmhouse, it was said, Napoleon inhabits separate apartments from the others. He took his meals alone, with two dogs to wait on him, and always ate from the Crown Derby dinner service, which had been in a glass cupboard in the drawing room. It was also announced that the gun would be fired every year on Napoleon's birthday, as well as the other two anniversaries. Napoleon was now never spoken of simply as Napoleon. He was always referred to in the formal style, like "our leader, Comrade Napoleon," and the pigs liked to invent for him some titles such as "Father of all animals," "Terror of mankind," "Protector of the sheepfold," "Duckling's friend," and the like. In his speeches, Squealer would talk with tears rolling down his cheeks of Napoleon's wisdom, the goodness of his heart, and the deep love he bore to all animals everywhere, even and especially to the animals who still lived in ignorance and slavery on other farms. It had become usual to give Napoleon credit for every successful achievement and every stroke of good fortune. You would often hear from him to remark, "Under the guidance of our leader, Comrade Napoleon, I have laid 5 eggs in 6 days," or two cows, enjoying a drink of the pill, would exclaim, "Thank the leadership of Comrade Napoleon, how excellent its water tastes." The general feeling of the farm was well expressed in a poem entitled "Comrade Napoleon," which was composed by Minimus, and which ran as follows: "Friend of the fatherless, fountain of happiness, Lord of the swill bucket, oh how my soul is on fire when I gaze at thy calm and commanding eye, like the sun in the sky, Comrade Napoleon. Thou art the giver of all thy creatures love, full belly twice a day, clean straw to roll upon. Every beast, great or small, sleeps at peace in his stall. Thou watchest over all, Comrade Napoleon. How I, a suckling pig, ere he should grow as big, even as a pint bottle or rolling pin, he should never learn to be faithful and true to thee. Yes, the first squeak should be Comrade Napoleon." Napoleon approved of this poem and caused it to be inscribed on the wall of the big barn, the opposite end from the 7 Commandments. It was surmounted by a portrait of Napoleon in profile, executed by Squealer in white paint. Meanwhile, through the agency of Whymper, Napoleon was engaged in complicated negotiations with Frederick and Pilkington. The pile of timber was still unsold. Of the two, Frederick was the more anxious to get a hold of it, but he would not offer a reasonable price. At the same time, there were renowned rumors that Frederick and his men were plotting to attack Animal Farm and destroy the windmill, the building of which had aroused furious jealousy in him. Snowball was known to still skulking on Pitchfield Farm. In the middle of the summer, the animals were alarmed to hear that 3 hens had come forward and confessed that there, inspired by Napoleon, they had entered into a plot to murder Napoleon. They were executed immediately, and fresh precautions for Napoleon's safety were taken. 4 dogs guarded his bed at night, 1 on each corner, and a young pig named Pink Eye was given the task of tasting all his food before he ate it, lest some of it be poisoned. At about the same time it was given out that Napoleon had arranged to sell the pile of timber to Mr. Pilkington. He was also going to enter into a regular agreement for the exchange of certain products between Animal Farm and Foxwood. The relations between Napoleon and Pilkington, though they were now only conducted through Whymper, were now almost friendly. The animals distrusted Pilkington as human being, but generally preferred him to Frederick, whom they both feared and hated. As the summer wore on, and the windmill neared completion, the rumors of an impending treacherous attack grew stronger and stronger. Frederick, it was said, intended to bring against them 20 men, all armed with guns, and he had already bribed the magistrates and police, so if they once get hold of title deeds of the Animal Farm, they would ask no questions. Moreover, terrible stories were leaking out from Pitchfield about the cruelties that Frederick practiced upon his animals. He had flogged an old horse to death. He starved his cows. He had killed a dog by throwing it into the furnace. He amused himself in the evenings by making cockfights with splinters of razor blades tied to their spurs. The animals' blood boiled with rage when they heard of these things being done to their comrades, and sometimes they clamored to be allowed out on a body to attack Pitchfield Farm, drive out the humans, and set the animals free. But Squealer counseled them to avoid rash actions and trust in Comrade Napoleon's strategy. Nevertheless, feeling against Frederick continued to run high. On Sunday morning, Napoleon appeared at the barn and explained that he had never at any time contemplated selling the pile of timber to Frederick. He considered it beneath his dignity, he said, to have dealings with scoundrels of that description. The pigeons who were sent out to spread tidings of the rebellion were forbidden to set foot anywhere on Foxwood, and were also ordered to drop the former slogan of death to humanity in favor of death to Frederick. In late summer, yet another of Snowball's machinations were laid bare. The wheat crop was full of weeds, and it was discovered that on one of the nocturnal visits Snowball had mixed weed seeds with the seed corn. And Gander, who had been very privy to the plot, had confessed his guilt to Squealer and immediately committed suicide by swallowing deadly nightshade berries. The animals now also learned that Snowball had never, as many of them had hitherto, received the order of Animal Hero First Class. This was merely a legend which had been spread some time after the Battle of the Cowshed by Snowball himself. So far from being decorated, he had been censured for showing cowardice in the battle. Once again, some of the animals heard this with certain bewilderment, but Squealer was able to convince them that their memories had been at fault. In the autumn, by a tremendous exhausting effort, for the harvest had been gathered at almost the same time, the windmill was finished. The machinery had still to be installed, and Whymper was negotiating the purchase of it, but the structure was completed. In the teeth of every difficulty, in spite of inexperience, of primitive implements, of bad luck and Snowball's treachery, the work had been finished punctually to the very day. Tired out but proud, the animals walked round and round their masterpiece, which appeared even more beautiful in their eyes when it had been built the first time. Moreover, the walls were twice as thick as before. Nothing short of explosives would lay them low this time, and when the thoughts of how they labored, what discouragements they had overcome, and the enormous differences that they would make their lives when the sails were turning and the dynamos running. When they thought of all this, their tiredness forsook them, and they gamboled round and round the windmill, uttering cries of triumph. Napoleon himself, attended by his dogs and his cockerel, came down to inspect the completed work. He personally congratulated the animals on the achievement and announced that the mill would be named Napoleon Mill. 2 days later, the animals were called together for a special meeting in the barn. They were struck dumb with surprise when Napoleon announced that they had sold the pile of timber to Frederick. Tomorrow, Frederick's wagons would arrive and begin carting it away. Throughout the whole period of his seeming friendship with Pinkerton, Napoleon had really been in secret agreement with Frederick. All relationships with Foxwood had been broken off, insisting messages be sent to Pinkerton. The pigeons had been told to avoid Pitchfield Farm, and after the slogan "From death to Frederick" to "Death to Pilkington." At that time, Napoleon assured the animals that the stories of an impending attack on Animal Farm was completely untrue, and that the tales about Frederick's cruelty on his own animals had been grossly exaggerated. All the rumors had probably originated with Snowball and his agents. It now appeared that Snowball was not, after all, hiding in Pitchfield Farm, but in fact had been there all his life. He was living in considerable luxury, so it was said, in Foxwood, and had really been a prisoner of Pinkerton for 2 years past. The pigs were in ecstasies of Napoleon's cunning. By seeming to be friendly with Pilkington, he had forced Frederick to raise his price by 12 pounds. But the superior quality of Napoleon's mind, said Squealer, was shown in the fact that he trusted nobody, not even Frederick. Frederick had wanted to pay for the timber with something called a check, which it seemed was a piece of paper which promised to pay written upon it. But Napoleon was too clever for him. He had demanded payment in 5 real pound notes, which were to be handed over before the timber was removed. Already Frederick had paid up. The sum he had paid was just enough to buy the machinery for the windmill. Meanwhile, the timber had been carted away at high speed. When all was gone, another special meeting was held in the barn for the animals to inspect Frederick's banknotes. Smiling benevolently and wearing both his decorations, Napoleon reposed on a bed of straw on the platform, with the money in his side, neatly piled on a china dish from the farmhouse kitchen. The animals filed slowly past, and each gazed his fill. As Boxer put out his nose to sniff the banknotes, and the flimsy white things stirred and rustled in his breath. 3 days later there was a terrible hullabaloo. Whymper, his face deadly pale, came racing up the path on his bicycle, flung it down in the yard to rush straight into the farmhouse. The next moment a choking roar of rage sounded from Napoleon's apartments. The news of what had happened spread around the farm like wildfire. The banknotes were forgeries. Frederick had got the timber for nothing. Napoleon called the animals together immediately. In a terrible voice pronounced the death sentence upon Frederick. When captured, he said, Frederick should be boiled alive. At the same time, he warned them that after this treacherous deed, the worst is to be expected. Frederick and his men might make their long-expected attacks on any moment.